Congresswoman Summer Lee, that's a name that you probably already know, but if not, you should get to know who she is. It was a privilege to be able to sit down with her and talk about not only the latest in the Epstein files and her dogged pursuit as a part of the House Oversight Committee to be able to get that transparency to the American people, but also to talk about the role of big money in politics and why that shouldn't be the norm anymore. We also got the chance to talk about the lasting impacts of the big bullshit bill from convicted felon Donald Trump. And lastly, why we, as the people, we must reclaim our power and make this country into what we want it to be. And joining me now is Congresswoman Summer Lee. Congresswoman, it is a privilege to be able to spend time with you. I know it's incredibly busy and hectic now that folks are back at work, at least some of you. I would say the Democrats are back at work. I'm not holding out too much hope for the GOP at this point. But, Congresswoman, I wanted to start straight out of the gate to ask you about the latest on Epstein. I thought it was, and pardon the lingo, but I thought it was a pretty baller move, what you did. And I don't know if a lot of people need to be reminded of this, but you introduced a motion during a hearing that was based on immigration policies from the Trump administration. And that motion is actually what got the ball rolling for the House Oversight Committee to serve a bipartisan subpoena on the Department of Justice. And the way that you got it done, like I said, was pretty impressive because I think on its face, as we've seen the attempt to get, the discharge petition signed off on by Republicans, et cetera, I think on its face, if it had just been, hey, here's this Epstein issue, I don't know if Republicans would have signed on, but the way that you kind of put it in there before the recess, that was, I think, prematurely called by Speaker Johnson to avoid Epstein. This is how we got this ball rolling. So I want to say, number one, thank you for your tenacity on that. But number two, what's with the drips and the drabs and the little bit here and there in terms of this rolling production from the Department of Justice that's run by Pamela Joe, as I call her?
Oh yeah, I mean the drip, like the slow drip, that's an act of desperation, right? They were expecting like so many other things with Trump that, when he says, stop, stuff stops. When he says jump, they say how high, right? Yeah. This is really like the first thing that he has attempted to change the subject on, he's attempted to distract from, and for whatever reason it may be, right? His own base, the American population is just not, they're not falling for the distractions. So now like the final thing that they have is for the Trump-run DOJ to basically try to skirt around our subpoena. So, right, first of all, it is a lawful subpoena. They were supposed to. Yes. It's lawful. They're supposed to have provided and produced all of the files, right? Anything that is in their possession that has anything to do with this Epstein case, right? They were compelled to give that over. Now, obviously what they said, after Comer basically had to sign the subpoena because we were able to get Republicans to agree to our motion. He knew, just like Trump knows, just like Maxwell and everybody else, all the secret people who have not been named yet, who have been protected, they all know they're running out of tape right now. They know it. So whether it's a slow production or not, I don't think that the American people are gonna relent. Just like I think you can expect that the Congress isn't either.
Yeah, and the other thing is House Oversight also served the subpoena on the Epstein estate. Yeah. And I posted a video about this. I do appreciate the relevancy of the birthday book, which was the basis of a stupid $10 billion lawsuit from Trump against the Wall Street Journal, which, by the way, somebody's going to be, having something to be worrying about now that we've actually seen the production of this birthday book, thereby proving that this thing exists. I think that's important. I think it obviously goes to show that people like Donald Trump knew about the character or lack thereof of Jeffrey Epstein. I see the common denominator in those submissions into that birthday book being sexually explicit, sexually suggestive, pretty much disgusting and depraved. But there's other stuff, Congresswoman, that I really am interested in seeing. And I know y'all are going to let us know when you get it. It's things like non-disclosure agreements, financial documents. I mean, I feel like some of these are either things that are smoking guns and or could lead you down the path to even more compelling information about identification of the other people who are just as culpable as Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, Katie, I think that's the clue. Like, I think that's the thing. Every drip drop, despite their, obviously their best efforts, every one of them kind of leads us closer to where we're actually trying to get, right? So I think the birthday book, it just did say that very quickly. I think the birthday book was important because what it does is like, it doesn't like, it won't allow them to shut the door on this and like turn a corner, right? All of these folks who for decades have maintained that, oh, my relationship with Jeffrey Epstein wasn't intimate, it wasn't personal. It was, casual. It was, he was an acquaintance. But then here they are, sending, these, just disgusting lewd like notes and imagery. But the real key is like the birthday book, it just gives this, feel that everybody was in on the joke. Yeah. And I think that this is the point, right? That everybody has been in on the joke. We had the opportunity to talk to some survivors, right? Some of the survivors, some of their legal counsel and their teams. And I think that the common thread was aside from the fact that for decades they have been talking, they have been speaking, they have been to court cases, they've named names, of course, right? They have, and the legally there are whatever restrictions, but they're trying to tell us, when you get these files, when you go to, you'll see what the FBI has, you'll see what they've been, what pathways they were taking. You'll see that this is multi-system, right? That it isn't just a book here. It isn't, a letter there, but instead it's like financial systems are involved. Maybe governments are involved. It's people at every level, right? Not just the rich and powerful, but obviously the rich and powerful, but it's even people who were in his mansion or in his, in his home. One of the survivors told us that there were so many people around who knew, who were watching it, that she felt like a ghost. She just felt like a ghost because how could all these people be involved and no one is saying anything. No one is doing anything. So every single drop, every drip is like a dam breaking. Everyone is its own dam breaking that is leading us to the next, the next big water body that they are trying desperately to keep us from.
Yeah, I often say that it's money and means, and I'm a former prosecutor that has prosecuted these types of cases. And one name that I have been kind of relentlessly, pounding the drums about is Alex Acosta. I am from Florida. I'm a lawyer down here. I know exactly who he is. And the fact that he authorized and approved that sweetheart deal that allowed Jeffrey Epstein to evade federal prosecution in the mid-2000s, which I think set him up to further and continue his sexual abuse of children, there has to be some accountability by him having to answer questions surrounding that sweetheart deal. And so I know he's supposed to come and sit for a depo with House Oversight on September 19th. Just briefly, some thoughts from you about somebody like that who I think for decades now has escaped kind of accountability to have to explain what happened with that deal.
Yeah. And I think, that's another one of these kind of like multi-system failure like issues. Here we have, someone in the, AG, Florida at the time. And let me just say, like you said it, hit the nail on the head, right? This was not a victimless deal, right? No. To give him a sweetheart deal, someone who we know, not now, I'm certain that the more we will learn, we knew then that this man was one of, if not the most prolific, sex traffickers in history, right? To help him evade federal charges, to help him evade the true accountability for the crimes that he was still actively committing and still committed to continuing, right? That put so many more people in danger. It put not just, the victims, the survivors who had already been harmed by him, the more to come. We continue to give abusers, sexual abusers, especially when they're powerful, right? We have a society that just continues to just bend over backwards to make it easier for them to harm people. And this is one of those examples of using the legal system in a way that is perverted, in a way that, let's just be real, right? There are some folks who would never get the consideration that this man did, and they have been accused of far less. But because this man is very, very wealthy, very, very powerful, very, very white, right? He gets off to continue a horrific crime spree. So yeah, we want to hear from this man. We want we want Americans to understand that this isn't just Epstein. This isn't just a political theater of like, oh, well, Trump, is sending, lewd pictures. It's not even just that. It's just so much more, so deeper. And again, this isn't even just about this case, right? Because there is an Acosta behind so many other cases like this. This is just the most egregious version of it.
Yeah, so my gratitude to you, and I'm sure I echo that of many Americans, that you, Congressman Robert Garcia and others have been relentless as well about making sure that this issue stays in the public discourse and it doesn't go away and that it isn't swept under the rug. But one thing that I like to say is Democrats can walk and chew gum. And that means that we need to focus on all the major issues that impact Americans, inclusive of, yes, combating things like child sex trafficking. You just had a spectacular roundtable at Carnegie Mellon University about big money in politics. And it really captured my interest, Congresswoman, because I feel like either some people think it's a foregone conclusion that money is the only way that politics is supposed to operate. But you're here to tell the American people it's really important for them to understand why this influence is not the right way to be looking at politics.
And when you think about our political system, I mean, it is essentially done a number on people, right? I think like the American, like the American elections and voters, right, can't really conceive of a system operating, differently than ours does. But, there are enough people still alive today who can remember an era when money in politics did not exist in this way. It just didn't, right? This is just not the way it's always been. And it definitely should not be the way that it continues on. But we are basically in an arms race, right? We are, right? Yeah. Every single election cycle, more and more money gets poured in. Every election cycle, new influences crop up, right? It was the NRA and the gun lobby at one point, or pharma, and now it's, fintech,
Elon Musk, frankly,
and Elon Musk. Now it's tech bros, literally using campaign finance law to buy themselves a seat in the Oval Office, right? The Oval Office. So it's that bad. It is that bad. And what we want to do is we want to talk about it, and we want to give language to it in a way that resonates, obviously, but gives clear, directives. Like we have to know how we got here, but we also have to really help people understand that if you care about democracy, if you care about fair representation, if you care about the gerrymandering issue that we are seeing all over the country right now, right? This is one of those root cause issues. You care about environmental justice or, common sense gun control. If you care about healthcare, Medicare for all, whatever it may be. If you don't, and if we're not as Democrats able to kind of come out of our silos and really, really hone in on this kind of corruption, democracy reform, piece. This is all roads lead to this money and politics piece. We cannot afford to go on this way. And the more money that comes in, the less likely you are to see as diverse a body as we see now, which painstaking to get here, right? Again, don't take it for granted that the Congress didn't always look like this. There weren't always women, right? There weren't always, people of color. There weren't always poor folk. So I think that this is the central issue in our democracy. And I think that I would love to see Democrats not just like centering this more, but like really walking it like we talk it. In Democratic primaries, there are signals that we can send that we're serious about this. And I want to see us do it and embrace it.
And that's the reason why I wanted to ask you about it, because it has become so incredibly pervasive that people, I think, just take it for granted, and they don't have to. Like, there is a way of running campaigns and getting into office that doesn't necessarily involve big money in politics. You did mention the fact that now Congress, I mean, I still think we're woefully inadequate in terms of representation, but it's starting to look obviously a little bit better when it comes to diversity. But one of the things that Trump is doing is he's definitely making sure that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And one of those ways was obviously through what I call, and it's my words, the big bullshit bill is what I call it, the BBB.
Oh, I've called it that as well.
Oh, okay, good. Okay,
I didn't
want to offend you, because it's pretty damn accurate in my opinion. But this big bullshit bill, when it comes to the SNAP benefits, this Closing the Meal Gap Act, which is something that you are heavily involved in, that's being introduced. Talk about why it's so important for people to understand that you and others are fighting in DC, because food insecurity is about to get worse for Americans, courtesy of Donald Trump and the Republicans that voted for this bill.
And that's saying something. It's already bad. We all know it. We all know it, right? You can't go to the grocery store. I don't care what grocery store it is. You can't go and leave feeling anything but discouraged, right? It's that bad. And when you look at this reconciliation bill and what is about to come, like, we are approaching beyond crisis level. So what, our bill does, first of all, it takes into account that hunger and the issue around food insecurity. It is also an issue that lives within the context of other issues, right? Folks who are now going to be cut are going to find their SNAP benefits either cut completely, or they're going to find them dwindling, every month, or, less and less and less, even as prices get, more and more expensive, right? We also know that they're also dealing with cuts to Medicaid. They're dealing with the housing crisis. They're dealing with rising costs all around them. So this is one of those pieces of legislation that really actually does try to take into account, right, that people don't have enough, but that we have enough to provide and meet their need, right? So what we want to do is we want to make sure that the qualifications for folks to get SNAP benefits and get the appropriate amount are in place, taking into account, of course, Medicaid, taking into account some of these other programmatic failures, right? So that more, not fewer people are able to be fed. Of course, that's just one thing. Right? That's one thing. There's still so much more. Right now, we are in a race to restore benefits, right? The Republicans are in a race to cut them. Right? We're, barreling towards another budget impasse or continual resolution. Everyone they use as an opportunity to pull Americans down, and everyone we need to, be plotting how we can lift Americans up. This is one of those things.
I'm glad you bring up the imminent government shutdown, which is about to click September 30th / October 1st. I can tell you this has been one of those kick the can down the road moments where the continuing resolutions upon continuing resolutions has brought us to this moment. I wrote a piece the other day that I found to be I thought controversial, but then when I posted it, the level of support was kind of overwhelming. I pretty much said that we should shut the government down as Democrats. More specifically, it's the Republicans that are shutting it down because they need our help to be able to be the adults in the room to get things done. I don't want to make you Johnny on the spot to ask you about your take on this, and you don't have to agree with me, of course, but I do feel like, and I'm not trying to sound fatalistic, Congresswoman, but it's like, what do we have left to lose at this point? It's like we bail out the Republicans, we give them help thinking that there's some bipartisan work to be done. And then we get to the point where they just pass this big bullshit bill and it's literally killing Americans. And so in my mind, it's like, look, maybe one way to wreak less havoc is to shut the government down and have the Republicans be blamed for it because it is a Trump administration.
Whether they're blamed for a shutdown or they're blamed for just like catastrophic cuts, it is going to be so important that whether it be Democrats, Democratic politicians, or, the media, right? We have a responsibility right now to tell the story and to tell it accurately. So that's just number one, right? This isn't Democrats shutting down anything. And Republicans have a trifecta, and they have been rubbing this trifecta in America's face. What do they say? They have a mandate. They have a mandate to harm people. They have a mandate to disappear and deport our loved ones. They got a mandate, to cut healthcare and food benefits and incarcerate homeless people. They had a mandate for all that stuff. And it's time that we hold them accountable for it. If they are committed to continuing their assault on the most vulnerable people in this country, the Democrats have a responsibility to hold the line. They have a responsibility to show that we will be the ones that will fight for them. But that also means that we have I won't call it the burden, but we have the obligation to help Americans conceptualize it, to help Americans know why we're doing this, that we will vote for a budget that, restores these critical programs. We'll vote for a budget that is not unconstitutional. We will do that. And if the Republicans are committed to unconstitutional tactics like pocket rescissions, or if they're committed to, larger cuts on America's most successful and important programs, then they will have to own that. They will have to own that. But I will not join them. I will not join them in harming my neighbors. I will not join them in harming my family and my community. I just won't. But we need the press. We need journalists. We need the media to really, really turn a corner here And obviously, like we always have folks like you, right? We have folks who are telling the truth, but like systemically, I'm just going to say it, systemically, we have to get to a point where the media, I think the media knows, and I always say this, right? The media knows what its job is in a democracy, but we're in a failing democracy now. So we have to start to ask our question, what is the media's role in a failing democracy? How do we use platforms, especially those more neutral or fact-based, information-based platforms, to do just that? Right? Give people the appropriate context, the appropriate information, and lead them to where they need to go, and let Republicans continue to hang themselves.
Listen, that's why my jump to independent media made sense and was really the only option for me, because there will never be a more critical time in history. I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I've always said I will never hang my head in shame that I was not on the right side of history when it counted the most. So for me to be able to have the privilege of time with you, Congresswoman Lee, to be able to have these conversations, that is why I do what I do. So I want to say thank you so much for taking the time. Again, I know you're incredibly busy, but I know my viewers, my subscribers, the people that are tuning in, we're grateful for your advocacy, but we're also grateful for you being a truth teller, because to your point, there's not enough of us that are out there these days, and we're the most important part of democracy, we as the truth tellers. So Congresswoman Summer Lee, thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time for having me. Thank you for your commitment to independent journalism. I'll leave on this, it is a terrifying time. I don't take that for granted. You don't take that for granted, right? We know we're in the middle of it, so we see it. But I also want to say that it is a time where, as all of these things are happening around us, this is a time for people in America to reclaim their own power, to reclaim their own vision for what they want our systems to look like. We can actually do both. And we have to do that work, and we have to be committed to that work. And it's not just, the Democratic Party, it's not just your elected officials, but it's us when we go home. We have to do this when we go home, organizing people and helping them to understand how they should be looking at these things, right? That's our job too. Just as much as our job is to come here and vote no, it is also our job to go home and make sure that our labor unions, to make sure that our movement organizations, to make sure our teachers and our educators, all these folks, right, are moving in the direction that gets us not just back on track to where we were, but really, really getting us to where we could be. Right, the landscape that can be, when we survive this. So, thank you so much for allowing me to be here with you today.
I love it. I'm so inspired. We need to reclaim our power, and that's the most important message that anybody can share. But yeah, thanks so much for doing this today. I appreciate it. Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network, so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.